So I saw Morbius. (2022's) first Marvel film is Morbius, and it stars Jared Leto as Dr. Michael Morbius, who's looking for a cure for some sort of blood thing, and Matt Smith's also in it as either Lucian or also Milo. He's got two different names. It's a bit, I think. I have no notes for this. Generally, I just flat out write my reviews. For this, I've got nothing. Here's the thing, I've actually got kind of a hot take about this film. I'll cut straight to the chase. I think this might be the best Sonyverse spider film. I need to clarify, of three, of Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and this movie, I think this one's the best. And look, it's not a great three, so being the best doesn't mean much. But this kind of felt the most coherent as a movie. Looking at Venom and Venom 2, I can't specifically say what the plot of those films are, whereas here, I get a progression and I get an understanding of everything that's going on. You see the kind of beginnings of Morbius, you see his fall into the creature he has to become. It's not good, but it at least is a step towards making an actual film. So yes, I actually didn't hate this, but as a movie-going experience, it is still wild. Jared Leto, Morbius as a character, is very strange. You know, he wants to help people, but he is so like hell-bent on fixing this rare blood disease that he's willing to do things against kind of a doctor's code. Jared Leto is such an odd individual that it kind of fits. The film wants me to feel uncomfortable when he drinks a bag of blood, but it kind of feels like, oh yeah, this guy's pretty Whatever practical makeup effects were in here were pretty good. When the kind of Morbius creature becomes fully CG, that's when we can see the budget. There's a few like moments, and it feels like, I think it was just called Humans, the BBC 3 series from back in the day, or just like early Doctor Who visual effects. It doesn't look great. But speaking of Doctor Who, Matt Smith in this is probably worth the price of admission. He is having so much fun. There's elements of his character I don't really want to spoil here, but I will say I'm very glad they went the places they did with him, because it just gave Matt Smith just this stupid role to bite on.
You don't understand.
I do understand. Please, have I ever denied you anything? Have I ever said no? Have I always given you the money?
I can't control it!
What, so you get to live and I get to die, is that it?
I would basically compare Matt Smith in this to Pedro Pascal in Wonder Woman 1984. The film is terrible, but every time Pedro is on screen, you kind of at least have something to kind of grasp onto and see that someone is trying. That's what it feels like when Matt Smith's on the screen. It's really, really fun, and I just wish my boy would get a good movie for once. And another element that makes it similar to Wonder Woman 1984 in the Pedro and Matt Smith kind of parallels is when Matt Smith's character rocks up in this film, he has so much more interesting things going on in his life. Morbius has the blood condition, and he has, vampire stuff. Matt Smith somehow has all these like bodyguards. Apparently he swindled someone in like a casino. He's rich somehow. You see him as a child at the beginning of the film, and there isn't much backstory, so maybe he comes from royalty or something. Maybe I'm pulling in an element of The Crown. But there is just so much more life, both to Matt Smith's performance and also the character himself, that when the thing that happens to Matt Smith's character happens, I was like, that's a better movie. In the same way, every time Max Lord was doing stuff in Wonder Woman 1984, I'd be like, yeah, that's interesting. Milo or Lucius or whatever the he's called is just a more interesting character than anything Morbius is doing. I will say the action in this film, which has also been criticized, is not the worst. There's a weird, kind of dilemma that you have in that the anti-hero is the protagonist. It's the same problem with Venom. I don't know if I'm supposed to root for him because he's killing innocent people a lot of the time. For me, it feels like Sony are consistently trying to do these villain movies, paint them as anti-heroes, but they can't quite decide how to do that. I look at a film like Joker. It's very clear that the protagonist of the film is a bad person, but it's still a watchable journey, and as an audience member, you feel for them, but are very well aware that you should not be rooting for them. Whereas in these films, everyone is in that grey space. Everyone is kind of an anti-hero, and it's really hard to kind of grasp onto how you're supposed to feel about all the action that is taking place. Which is why when the villain of this film turns up, and a lot of the action is more directed against fighting them, or watching them do a lot of bad things, it's a little bit more easier to bite into. I should stop saying that. Grey, again, that is the word for this Sonyverse. Everything's kind of dark and uninteresting. I know there's popcorn movies and there's stuff like the Fast and the Furious movies, but there's still interesting stuff going on there. In all three of these Sonyverse films, there is just not a single element that I will remember. At a stretch, I guess Tom Hardy's performance as Eddie Brock is bizarre, and I might take that with me. I'm trying to work out how I can convince you that this film is not the worst one of the three. I guess it's that it's 2 hours and it doesn't feel like 2 hours, whereas the other movies are short, but they feel longer. This one actually feels like it's got a good pace. All the kind of story beats linked together in a way that feels like a movie. You know what I mean? The Venom films just kind of feel like a weird amalgamation of events strung together vaguely as a plot. There's also a thing about the Sonyverse films where even though this one has I would say, better pace than any of the other two, it forgets how to end. Both in this and Let There Be Carnage, I looked at my phone at the point where I was like, I wonder how much longer this film has to go. And both of them were the last 15 minutes. And the protagonist and main antagonist had not come to blows yet. This film at least sets up a lot of emotional ties between Morbius and the villain. And yet, I felt nothing, which is terrible. The strangest thing about this film is it tries to be kind of like Batman Begins, Dark Knight, Nolan Batman stuff, to the point where the music sounds like it's from those films. There's just a rumbling sound that's like the dun dun. I don't want to spend time listening to the score, but I am maybe 99% sure that they have stolen a lot of the Nolan. I think that's the biggest thing across all of these films, is there's a lot of ideas and a lot of inspiration that they're taking from, and they just don't do them well. Venom 2 is a fun, silly movie, but it's just kind of done at a mediocre level. The first Venom film tries to be dark and brooding, but the cinematography and all the rest of it kind of falls apart. And then this gets close by having a decent story, pretty decent performances from both Leto and Matt, but then everything else around this film is so lackluster. Like I say, there's no interesting visuals, there's no interesting shots. At a bare minimum, maybe the way Morbius moves is pretty cool, but it almost just feels like Nightcrawler from the X-Men films. There is so many inspiration and bits and pieces that are kind of always cobbled together for these Sonyverse films that it never has its own unique identity. Now, for people that love Marvel films, you always wonder if there's a post-credit scenes. There are in this film. They've been talked about online. I'm not going to spoil them here. If you want to know about them, check them out. All the information's out there. Or go see the film, but maybe don't see the film. All I'll say is I am terrified for the future of these films. The next thing we've got is Kraven the Hunter, which, it's got Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who, maybe he's about on the same level as Tom Hardy as an actor that generally does really well in all the roles he gives. I don't love Jared Leto, so I didn't have confidence with him going into it, but it might work. The Kraven thing, it's just weird to me that they keep making these films without a Spider-Man. Supposedly, soon we will find out who the Spider-Person is in the Sonyverse, and at first, after No Way Home, I was kind of on the board of give it to Andrew. That after how mediocre these three films are, I don't want his legacy to be tainted by being this universe's Spidey. It all feels so incredibly messy, and the post-credit scenes just do something so disastrous to the wider Marvel universe that oh, it's such a weird experience, this whole universe. So yeah, Morbius isn't good. I know this review wasn't great either, but I still want to give it props for trying to be a movie, but I also don't want this universe to continue. Oh, it's so hard to talk about this film, man. Once it hits a streaming service, maybe give it a watch. I did a similar thing with Venom Let There Be Carnage. We were in lockdown when it came out, so I just waited till it hit something. Odd movie, man.